Hey, it's Jag. Welcome to part 4 of the Trinity Amps Triwatt Build. Today I bust out the soldering iron and populate the turret board. Did you know the moon is hollow? That's where the aliens have their base. Wow. Right?
Yeah.
Part number 4 of the Trinity Amps Triwatt Build. I'm going to skip ahead a few steps in the build instructions. I'm going to go to, I think it's step 4. There are still things to mount on the control panels, the terminal strips, the grounding lugs. I need to wire up the transformers. There's a whole bunch of wiring and electrical to do, still on the components that are on the chassis. I'd like a change, and I think maybe you would like a change too. So there's nothing wrong with building out the terminal board today. And it's step 5 of the actual instructions. I just feel like having that change today is not a bad idea, and so that's what I'm going to do. So last video we were looking at this. The sheet shows you placement for everything on the board. So I'm going to place everything that goes on the turret board today. So the first thing is to get the orientation of the board, and I guess I put this away too soon. You just want to make sure you're not trying to put components on backwards to the way the layout shows you. So of course I've just turned it around backwards. It's pretty obvious to most people to figure out. If you look, we have a 1K5 resistor here, so just 2 terminals in between the standoffs. And over here we have a 2K5 5 watt with 2 turrets on either side of it. Now that can confuse people because it looks right here, but it's not. What we do is we look next. We have the 4 diodes for the rectifier. 5 turrets should be next to these 2. And when I look over here, I only have 2 turrets, and that's because I've got the orientation wrong. Here are the 5 turrets. So we will turn that board. Now that we've got it oriented right, we will start putting components on. I kind of like to assembly line this to a certain degree. So what I mean by that is I'm going to put a number of components in the holes in the turrets before I solder them on, and then I can just go through and zip, 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 solder a bunch of stuff on. So usually when I do that, I'll do something like, the 2.5K, I'll do the diodes, and maybe these resistors, capacitor here. And so I'm going to start by loading that up. And of course I didn't separate out all the parts before I started. The one thing that I always do when I'm building is check the value of the components you're putting in. You want to know that they're within spec, at least to me. If they drift, if they're out of spec up to 10%, I'll leave that, because that's part of the what gives an amp its unique character, is that its parts might be just a little bit different than another one. But if the parts are way too out of spec, you need to address that. When I did the unboxing for this, I also did measure all the resistors. There are 1 or 2 that are drifted out of spec, somewhere between 5 and 10%. That didn't bother me. I'm also going to check the values of the capacitors and make sure they're within spec. So that's why I've got my my multimeter out. So first thing we need is a 2.5K 5 watt resistor. My vision's not as good as it used to be, so I find that using a jeweler's loupe kind of helps me to read these resistors. That's a 1K. So there's my 2K 5 watt. That's the diodes. First we'll check this 2.5K, and that reads 2.47, so we're really close to perfect there. Okay, you can check the diodes. They will conduct one way and not the other. So I will use the probes and check. I should get open on the diodes one way, and it should read almost a short going the other way. So as long as I get that, I know the diodes are okay. If I get open both ways or I get a short both ways, I know I have a failed diode. So here we go. We'll check. First one, that says infinite. I'll check that for each. Infinite, 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 and infinite. So now I'll reverse the leads, and I should see some numbers on my meter. And I do, 0.4, and 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, 0.4. So those diodes all look good. So let's put those on. My most invaluable tools for working on this are, of course, a nice sharp small pair of side cutters for cutting the leads to length. My fine nose needle nose pliers, I use those for everything. I even use them like tweezers. And I have a little lead bender tool. What it has is it's got these, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, there you go. It's got all these lines. So you can put your component in between the lines. So you take your component, you put it over top, and then however wide you want, you just bend the leads there, and they should fit perfectly in your turrets. So I can just go like this, and like this, and then I've got my leads bent, and they're the right distance apart for that turret. I'm going to put these in and just get an idea how much of the leads I need to cut off. And it looks like I need to cut off about maybe 3/8 of an inch, maybe a little more. I like to have the leads fit pretty tight into the turret toward where the component you're putting in is. That way it leaves as much room on the outside for the other components you need to put in. Okay, so I've got my leads bent to about the right distance apart. I'm going to sit them in there pretty flat, pretty level with the board. So the diodes have a stripe on the end. On the layout, it shows you where that band should go. So the band goes, for the first two, it goes toward me, and for the other two, it goes away from me. So generally, leave anywhere from 1/4 to, with these turrets, you could almost leave 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch of the lead. Unless you like little wires all over the floor to step on when you come down in the middle of the night to work on your amp, you probably want to have a garbage can close to you. So neatness counts. If you ever get a chance to look inside a real vintage Hiwatt, I have a Dave Reeves era Hiwatt, highlight era Hiwatt, if that means anything to any of you. That's the original era of Hiwatts. The inside of a Hiwatt, a vintage Hiwatt anyway, it's a work of art. It looks beautiful. So I always try and pay homage to that, and always make my builds look nice and neat and tidy. My next solder joint is going to be this end of these two diodes. Then I'll tack that resistor on there. When you store this away, when you're done working on it for the day, just make sure you hold it upright, just in case anything's loose on there. You turn it upside down, you don't want a bunch of stuff to fall off. I gotta tack that diode in there. 5-volt resistor, diode, 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 and diode. Also, one thing I almost forgot to do, there are jumpers that go under the board. There is a jumper wire that goes from here under the board to here. There's another jumper wire that goes from this 22K resistor all the way over to here. There's a jumper wire that goes from here to here. There's one that goes from this 220K over to this 100K. So I've got that wire, I've got that wire, I've got that wire, and I've got that wire. It should go without saying, use insulated wire. One thing you're going to have on the top here is you're going to have a ground bus, which goes here, and that's usually stripped wire all the way across. But that's because it's on the top. It's not going to be near the chassis or crossing any other components. These ones are going to come near other components. You don't want them shorting on a turret or something under there. So use insulated wire. Okay, 6 jumper wires. and that should be 20 gauge. If somebody is working on it, they might be able to see underneath the turret board by the color of the wire. It goes from here to there. So I am going to use a couple of different colors under here. So what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wires. I'll use the same color for these two, so I only need 5 colors. Alright, well, I'll start with this one, and I'm going to use yellow to go from here to here. So what I have to do is I have to put a jumper wire underneath. A jumper is going to go from here over to here. So I need enough wire to go from here to here, plus to go into the turret. I'm going to go about 3/4 of an inch more than I need. I can trim this a little shorter once I get it in there. And the one thing you want to get right about this is which turrets you're soldering this to, because once they're in there, you're going to forget about them, and you're going to solder other components in, and the last thing you need is a wire going the wrong way. Plus, when you get this whole thing assembled and in the amp, to change that, you're going to have to do a lot of work to get that out and fix that problem. So this is something that I will also be double checking everything when I think I've got this turret board ready to go into the amp. So we're going from this turret to this turret. Now, pre-fit that on this side of the board. Leave a little bit of room to move the wire out of the way of this turret underneath so heat doesn't melt through the insulation. So I've got about 1/8 of an inch more wire than I need. So I'm just going to trim this down. This is going to go on the bottom. It's going to go from there to there. Now remember, we're going to have to solder on the top side of this turret board as well. So we don't want to fill that hole up with solder. But again, we want to have that wire in there solid. Try and position it so it's equal distance from the bottom of the turrets, just so that we don't have any risk of melting through that wire or that wire shorting on anything. So that's that one. I know that I have this longish one, but I have these two. I'm going to put these two in first. Green for that. Generally, I try and keep green only ever for things that are going to ground. But underneath the board, it doesn't matter so much. I got to use a color. These two jumpers here. So if we look at this, we've got our diodes here. We got a capacitor and a capacitor, and then we've got a resistor and another resistor and another resistor, and then a big capacitor, and then the jumper goes on here. Okay, so this pair of turrets here, the jumper goes from this turret and it goes down and it meets with this capacitor, so it goes to here. For now, I'm just going to stick this in there and that in there. So there, I know where I'm going. So, and these wires, I'm going to go fairly straight, go about 1/4 of an inch past, and the other one will be exactly the same length. So, cut that, make another one, and that's ready to go in. And we're going to go into these two turrets. I like to let the that joint cool before I start the next one. You don't want to wobble the wire around while the solder is still molten, because it will make a cold solder joint. You'll get air in there that can give you some resistance and a bad connection. So you can see when the solder takes in that hole, and it just flows in. It looks nice and shiny. You've got a good connection. Give it a gentle tug. If it doesn't come out, it's tight enough. Alright, next wire goes from, should go from here, and then it goes diagonally past. Okay, so we're going to these two. Okay, so that wire will go from there to there. Okay, so there should be 3 in between, and there are. And then this wire is going to go in there. So I'm going to solder this side first. Okay, that's those two jumpers. So we've got that jumper done there. We've got those two jumpers. 6. So we're going to do this long one next. The jumper starts in this turret, and it goes all the way over to here, where the big 33 microfarad is going to go. 9, the 10th turret, not counting this turret. This wire is going to go from here all the way over to here. Now I try and keep these jumper wires a little bit, the leads that I trim, just a little bit shorter than I would do for things that go on the turret board on the top. The reason is the jumpers, you're probably not going to change anything about those down the road. On the top of the turret board, where all the electronic components are, you might decide to modify your amp. And so having those leads be a little longer means you can reuse the component easier if you want to, you know, do some experimenting. We've got the jumper in there. I'm going to solder that right now. 9, 10. It should go to there. And even on the bottom of a work of art high watt, where you can't see it, the wires do go at weird angles. Okay, so we've got that one in there. So that's that jumper. So we've got 2 more. We've got this one, and we've got this one. So we'll do this one. It's a 9th to 14th. And we'll take our little markers. 9. We'll use a white wire for this one. And then blue for the last one. You don't want the wires to be too tight, but you don't want them to be so loose that they're wobbling around all over underneath. And like I said in the last video, wires carry signal. And if they're going from one stage and they end up crossing back close to a stage before them, that can give you some feedback. It can re-inject itself into the earlier part of the signal path. Once again, we'll just do this so we know where we are. So that's going in there, and that's going in there. Cool. One more jumper to do, and that's this one that goes from the 4th to the 9th. Right where I just soldered the other one. So remove the solder from there, put a jumper in from there, and the 4th. So then you use the blue wire for that. So that's the other thing, is how often you do end up soldering something into a turret and not remembering that you're just going to have to put another wire in there right away. So it happens. There we go. And the faithful, handy, trusty solder sucker. Okay. Ouch. Still hot. So we've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we got all 6 jumpers. So we've got that one. We've got that one. We've got that one. We've got those 2, and we've got that one. So there we go. When I was doing the early part of this and, you know, digging through all of the bags and things for components, it reminded me, sort the parts before you start. I've lined up all of the components. I put them all in these 2 foams, capacitors and the 1 diode left in here. And all of the resistors in here. I put them in order from lowest value, smallest value, to largest value. What I'm going to do for the rest of this build, I think I've gone over enough of what goes on with the turret board, putting parts on, what my thinking is about that. So I'm going to blast through this on a time lapse. So stick around, we'll go through this really fast, and then I'll do a rundown at the end. well, I've got everything mounted to the turret board. The off-board wires, the wires that go from the turret board to the front panel jacks and controls and the back panel jacks and controls, I will wire up on the next video. This one has gotten a little bit long already and quite involved. So let's do a summary of what's going here. On all of the capacitors, the foil capacitors, I have put a black band at one end. The outside foil has the effect of providing some additional shielding. So you want to put the outside foil to the most grounded side of the circuit, either to the ground itself, in the cases where it does go to ground here, all of these, or toward a previous stage or the lower impedance stage. I'll explain that a little better. I'll do a midweek short and show how to test those capacitors to find out where the outside foil is. There are two ways you can do that. If you have an oscilloscope, you can use that. If you don't have an oscilloscope, there's a really easy little jig you can make with a guitar jack and a couple of alligator clips, and you can test it by the noise that it makes when you plug it in. Like I say, I'll explain that later. So, looking at the turret board, we've got everything soldered onto it. I've left these two turrets dry because there'll be coax cable coming from the controls in here, and I didn't want to have to desolder that later. All of the off-board wires, all of the wires going to the controls and jacks on the front and back panel, I will put those on the board in the next video when I start doing the wiring for the components on the chassis, the transformers, and of course the wires going to the controls. So that'll be in the next video. 2.5K 5-watt resistor. We've got the diodes for the rectifier, the band going that way on these two and band going that way on these two. We've got the Zener diode, which is there to drop voltage in the bias supply when you switch to KT66s. Then here we've got the 180K 1-watt resistor, a 620K 1-watt resistor, 47K resistor, 15K resistor, the diode for rectifying the bias supply. We've got 247 microfarad capacitors for the bias supply, 47 nanofarad foil capacitor, 82K resistor, 2 plate load resistors, 100K, 22K 2-watt resistor. We got 47 nanofarad foil capacitor, another one. We've got a 91K resistor, and then here we've got a 100 nanofarad foil capacitor, 7K5 2-watt resistor, another 100 nanofarad, 2.2K resistor, 22K resistor, 10 nanofarad foil capacitor, 470 ohm resistor, another 100K plate load resistor, 2.2K resistor here, 100K plate load resistor, 1 nanofarad capacitor, 560K resistor, 47 nanofarad foil capacitor, another 47 nanofarad foil capacitor, 100K resistor, 220K resistor, 220 picofarad capacitor, 1 nanofarad foil capacitor, another 100K resistor here, 10K 2-watt resistor there, 33 microfarad electrolytic, 16 microfarad electrolytic, 220K resistor, 22 nanofarad foil capacitor, 1K resistor, 2 microfarad electrolytic capacitor, 1K resistor here, 22 nanofarad foil capacitor, 220K resistor, 1 nanofarad foil capacitor, another 220K resistor, 2.2K resistor, 47 nanofarad foil capacitor, and a 1K5 resistor. So that's all the components on the board. And I talked in one of the earlier videos about a sense of accomplishment. Well, today I really feel like I've done something. We've got the whole board populated. We've got the jumpers on the other side. So I'm pretty happy. That was a lot of work I got done today. Probably got a lot of editing to do to get this video out. Like always, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Check out my band One Soul Thrust. The links are down below. Consider supporting One Soul Thrust on Patreon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up.